Richard Boyd-Barrett, please.
Yeah, I am also very disappointed the Taoiseach has left, but I hope the Minister will pass on a couple of the points that I wish to make here, which largely revolve around the issue of Palestine. But that raises a wider issue, because the Taoiseach referred to his, and I would really like to ask questions about this, his attendance at the Malmo conference against anti-Semitism and remembrance of the Holocaust. But what is disturbing is that at that conference, as is the wont of Israeli political leaders, President Herzog made the following statement: "When criticism of a particular Israeli policy mutates into questioning Israel's right to exist, this is not diplomacy, this is demonization and anti-Semitism, because Israel is the nation-state of the Jewish people." Okay, now this is a very familiar refrain. You can question this or that policy of Israel, but if you question the right of what some of us happen to believe is an apartheid state to exist, you're an anti-Semite. Now that is not acceptable. We should not sign up to definitions of anti-Semitism that suggest that, and we should be aware that Israel's claim to be the Jewish state representing the Jewish people is not a view shared by millions of Jews across the world. And it is appalling misuse of the terminology of anti-Semitism, and in my opinion it actually is an insult to the memory of the Holocaust to try and equate those two things. Israel is an apartheid racist state, and I say that based on its own legal constitution, particularly around the law of return. The law of return prioritises the rights of Jewish people to gain entry to the historic land of Israel or Palestine, whatever you call it, and deny that right to Palestinians, which exists under international law, UN Resolution 194. Which Israel denies and has denied since its foundation, since it ethnically cleansed 1 million Palestinians. Okay? So it is a racist state in its fundamental laws. And it practices that persecution of the Palestinian people and the denial of their rights on an ongoing and systematic basis. And it is entirely legitimate to say that we should not accept the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, that the Palestinians have the right to return, and therefore to question the existence of the Israeli state and pose the possibility of a single state where Jew and Palestinian and Christian and Arab and people of no religion would have equality in a single state. Not everybody agrees with that, but a lot of people believe it, and it is not an anti-Semitic view to hold. And so we absolutely have to stand out against that, and I want to commend Sally Rooney, the author, for publicly declaring her support for the boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign, which calls for a boycott and divestment and sanctions against the apartheid regime.
With regards to international relations and issues of foreign policy, I'd like to raise one particular issue of concern. 4 days ago, German warplanes were flying over Jerusalem, Ramallah and the occupied Palestinian territories, and undoubtedly terrifying countless people beneath them. On behalf of my friends living in the occupied territories, I'd like to put it made clear to the European Council members, such as Germany, Italy, Greece and France, that the racist terror state of Israel does not have the sovereign right to host their military air shows over the occupied territories. These military incursions are wrong, they show absolute contempt, they are unnecessary, but most of all, they're illegal. So we need to make our voice heard and say this is not acceptable, this display of force and power is not acceptable. Will the German jets be joining Israeli jets in bombing Gaza families next? Is that what's going to happen next? This sort of behaviour is an act of aggression dressed up as an air show, because the reality is it's a show of power. And I would ask that other EU member states like Italy, Greece and France taking part in this air show will, with the Israeli Air Force, that they need to respect Palestinian airspace, not violate it like the German Luftwaffe have. Germany is effectively rubber stamping Israeli terror. This is an act of solidarity by Germany, France, Greece and Italy with the racist apartheid state of Israel. Gurmagat.
this session it will be Minister Thomas Byrne Denham.
And I'd like to thank deputies for the statements. The agenda for this week's meeting of the European Council was discussed yesterday in Luxembourg at the General Affairs Council, which I attended. The Taoiseach has outlined his expectations for the European Council's discussion, and members in the House as well have reflected that too, on COVID-19 and digital energy prices, trade and migration. And make no mistake, the issue of energy prices is probably going to be the signature issue of this particular summit. But make no mistake, the European Union is a community of law and values. Without acceptance of this and consistent implementation, our unity and the functioning of the Union breaks down. The values in Article 2 of the Treaty underpin everything we do together, including the rule of law, and this must be respected by all Member States. I should say as well, and I think I just need to say this briefly, the issue of anti-Semitism will be on the agenda. And I was very proud that the Taoiseach attended the Malmo conference, and I would appeal to deputies, when we're talking about anti-Semitism, keep it separate. Just don't even bring it into discussion about Israel-Palestine. Just anti-Semitism, full stop, is an evil which needs to be tackled. The Taoiseach was at the Malmo summit representing us proudly on ways to deal with this evil, and I would appeal to members to deal with anti-Semitism and do not bring extraneous issues into it, because it certainly doesn't give. It doesn't give. Well, yes, but I think the issue of anti-Semitism is just so serious at the moment, and the issue of the Holocaust and remembering the Holocaust and learning the lessons from it must be constantly in our memories here, in our minds, that we are constantly on our guards that nothing like that can ever happen again. And we cannot mix that in a discussion about the situation on the ground in Israel and Palestine. Ireland has been a supporter of a two-state strategy for decades. In fact, we were the first. The late Brian Lenihan Sr. Was the person who brought forward this proposal. And to be fair, questioning the right of only one country to exist, I think Deputy Boyd-Barrett should reflect on that. That is not acceptable. The State of Israel is recognised by us, is recognised by almost every country in the world. It is there, but we want two states there. We want a Palestinian state and an Israeli state living there side by side in peace and security. And that is the mainstream of global opinion. As the mainstream, I have to say, it's the mainstream of European left-wing opinion as well. I think some left-wing politicians in this House are completely out of the mainstream. We have to be constantly on our guard about anti-Semitism. Absolutely, it is just so dangerous, and it needs to be said. And there are certainly issues being raised at a global level about comments that are made in this House about Israel, comments that are made in this House about issue and mixing the issue of anti-Semitism with day-to-day politics. I think is very, very dangerous. This is something we just must be clear on and have a full stop on. We have a very proud record in this country of our dealings as an honest broker in the Israeli-Palestine situation in support of a peaceful solution there that protects all of the people of that region.